Hi, this is Dr. P with a nuts and bolts discussion of game design. In this case, ways to reduce chance in combat in sweep of history games. Now, what's a sweep of history game? It's a game like my own Britannia and its derivatives, or History of the World, that covers the long term. Turns take decades or even centuries. Well, in such circumstances, combat chance ought to even out. Even if there are particular battles where luck plays a big part, which is often the case, in the course of decades or centuries, it ought to even out. Also, usually there's just one or two types of unit. For example, foot armies and cavalry. So you don't have a complicated battle. Now in Britannia, each army rolls one die and hits on a 5 or a 6, possibly modified by terrain and leaders. But even in a game with something like 800 dice rolls, this can leave some feeling in some players that the dice were against me in a particular play. So I've tried to figure out ways to ameliorate this feeling, to reduce the standard deviation of the results. And there are a number of methods that I've used in various prototype games, and as I list each one, I'll also show at least one prototype, or list the title of at least one prototype that uses it. There are 5 of them. I'll just go through each one in turn. Combat table, which I use in Hellenia, which is the Mediterranean Sea, Carthage, Rome, Alexander's successors, and so on. Now, combat tables are very old, coming from Avalon Hill games, but most people nowadays, most publishers nowadays say, don't make people look something up in a table. Nonetheless, it has its advantages. Now, the table can have the strength of the force, so that it's cross-indexed with a die roll to indicate the enemy strength that is eliminated. Or it can have odds, like the old Avalon Hill tables. In the first case, it's usually independent. Both players roll on the same table for their strength. In the second case, with odds, it's usually dependent. There's one roll on an odds table, and that covers all the results. Now, especially with the independent method, the standard deviation can be forced to be small. There are just 6 results, and if those results are close together, there's not much variation in the luck. There's a little bit, but not too much. The second method is to use 2 dice and 2 hits. And I'm going to use this in Epic Britannia, Conquer Britannia, new editions of Britannia. It reduces the standard deviation, but you're actually rolling more dice, and it could take longer. You roll 2 dice for each army or unit instead of 1. 2 hits are required to kill an army. So in Britannia, you'd roll 2 dice for an army, and you need 2 5s or 6s to kill an enemy army. So initial combat is likely to be much less bloody, which allows for retreats before the defender takes a big loss, or the attacker. One army has 1 chance in 9 instead of 1 in 3 of killing an opponent in 1 round. But it's also much more likely to survive the first round. Now in Epic Britannia, I may use a variation because needing 2 6s to hit somebody defending in difficult, or 2 6s to hit cavalry or Romans is pretty bad. So you're going to need a 6 to hit them first time, and then a 5 or a 6 will finish them off. At least that's the plan. It requires testing. Next we have the diceless proportional method, which I use in a Space Empires game called Pleiades Cluster. No dice, obviously. Destruction is exactly proportional to strength. This is the classic melee formula used by people such as F.W. Lanchester in his research in World War I. For the days of firepower, it turned out to be proportional to the square of the strength. But the games I'm thinking about generally are pre-gunpowder, certainly pre-big firepower, and so proportional to the actual strength works out well. The simple way to implement this is each unit inflicts a hit. And X hits, usually 2 or 3, are required to kill an opponent. To be exactly equivalent to Britannia, where a normal is 1/3 of a hit, you need 3 hits to kill an opponent. Now, this can run a danger of some sterility of feeling. I used it in a game called Eurasia, which is very much a sweep of history game, and I changed to a different method because I felt it was a little too calculating, a little too sterile. The method I changed to I also use in Assyria, Rise and Fall of Assyria. You roll a die for each unit and sum the result. The higher total wins. Ties usually would go to the defender. That's a choice of the designer. So if 3 units attack and they roll a 3, 4, and a 5 for 12, and 2 defend and roll a 5 or a 6, the attackers win 12 to 11. 1 unit of the loser is eliminated. The loser must retreat, or if the attacker, they have to withdraw to where they came from. If there's nowhere to retreat, you fight again, so surrounding an enemy is very important in this method. It's possible for 1 army to defeat 2 in this situation, but it's quite unlikely. So we reduce the standard deviation. Also, this method is for games where generally there won't be more than 2 or 3 armies in a particular place. Then we have another diceless method, combat cards or battle cards, which you use in Germania, which is not a Britannia-like game actually. Each player has a small hand of battle cards with low numbers. Now those cards may come from a shared deck, or each player may have a separate individual deck, again evening out the luck. Now some people don't like minus numbers or zeros, so perhaps the cards will have between a +1 and a +3. Each unit also has a strength, 1 for foot, 2 for horse. Each player plays a face-down battle card to add to the mix. The stronger wins, ties harm both. So the loser or the tires lose 1 unit. The loser retires or retreats or withdraws. Now this can be supplemented with special cards like defender flees or attacker must retreat, or a card where you get to play 2 more cards after you see what your opponent played. Which is also what a leader does for you, is let you play two cards after you've seen what the opponent played. Now undoubtedly there are other ways to do this, and of course risk is a different method. These are the ones that I've found satisfactory. Thanks for listening.